We interrupt this program to bring you Courage the Cowardly Dog Show, starring Courage the Cowardly Dog. Created by John Dilworth in 1996, Courage the Cowardly Dog would be picked up by Cartoon Network and run for 4 seasons until 2002. The show's spooky visuals, muddy textures, and overall eerie atmosphere would strike fear into the hearts of 10-year-olds across the nation as Courage tried to save Muriel and her husband, Eustace, from whatever paranormal danger they may encounter in their secluded shack in the middle of nowhere. But creepy stuff happens in Nowhere. From its awkward beginnings to the strangest finale in cartoon history, let's look back at Courage and his little show from top to bottom to see what made it so iconic.
Stupid dog! You made me look bad!
Courage the Cowardly Dog is a show defined by its characterization. Sure, we all remember the show for being scary, but what makes Courage stand out from its contemporaries of the time was its uniquely written world and characters. The team behind Courage wasn't afraid to take risks, and that includes flipping the Monster of the Week style formula on its head to focus on the characterization of both protagonists and antagonists. You got Kat's menacing confidence, an iconic song that goes, Shirley, who I think is meant to be another dog, and her apprehensiveness towards the family but soft spot for Courage. Hell, I've even seen some people say how The Great Fusilli was one of their favourite episodes because of the villain. Like, the show just wouldn't work with someone like Tintin, or, I don't know, Johnny Test as its main character. Courage is, at its core, a kids show. And with a kids show that's so character-driven, it's easy to use the main characters as plot starters so that they can learn a lesson at the end that can rub off on the audience. Courage does not talk down to the viewer. It never demeans the characters outside of their usual personas in order to shove a lesson down the viewer's throats. That's not to say the show doesn't have morals, but they never overshadow the plot of the episodes themselves. Eustace never appreciates what he has, Courage never stops getting scared, Muriel always blindly trusts strangers. These aspects of the characters are never challenged because changing them would change the core dynamic of the show. And this works, the show never got stale up until the very end. Sure, there could be some dud episodes in the later seasons, but even by the final season, the show never felt like it had become a shell of its former self. Every episode of the show is shown the exact same passion and effort as the previous, and never sacrifices what made it so good in the first place. I want to quickly go over my experience with Courage and why I personally love the show so much. Courage the Cowardly Dog always had that strange vibe to it as a kid. I was a bit too young for its original airing, so to me it was always one of those eerie old shows reserved for the rerun slots at night, and for good reason as well. Seeing stuff like this freaked me and I'm sure many others the hell out, and I only really began to appreciate the show once I'd grown up more. I personally think the show works best when it's scary, like legitimately scary. As a Monster of the Week style show, Scooby-Doo is probably the easiest show to compare Courage to, although that show always felt a bit too campy for my tastes, even the more modern releases. Scooby-Doo was never scary in the way Courage was. It was more of an adventure mystery show than focusing on making the scenes actually spooky. I think the way Courage handled its monsters made it stand out from its contemporaries. The show wasn't afraid to leave things unexplained. Sometimes the monster just wasn't defeated, instead simply having its attention deflected away from the family. This leads to endings that could feel happy and conclusive, but still bite at the back of your mind how there was no mask-off moment from the monster, and nothing really changed or got solved. As a kid, that's really scary to have that uncertainty, since we're so used to seeing the heroes win and the monsters lose. I know to a young mind it would make me fearful that the monsters were still out there somewhere. The episodes with iconic monsters that everyone remembers, like the one with King Ramses or the giant floating head, work so well because they give their villains the gravity and the appropriate atmosphere that they deserve, and never downplay their threat level, oftentimes upping it using the uncanny stylistic choices of the time. The standard for monsters and Courage I always thought was really strong. Every single villain felt like they belonged in this world, and that's saying something for a show as outlandish as this. Even a standard human antagonist was often able to look horrific. The Courage team had such a knack for effectively creepy character design. It reminds me a lot of a primitive Meat Canyon in a way, with designs not being afraid to be detailed and visceral. Things like this fetus creature in Cabaret Courage that just oozes with body horror, god, it's so good. Like I said, the show was never afraid to push the boat out with some of its scary concepts, and as we'll see later, this is what I think Courage's biggest strength was, but also what ultimately led to its downfall. Another thing that made Courage the Cowardly Dog excel in its Monster of the Week premise is how it was presented. We mainly focus on episodes through the perspective of Courage, who works surprisingly well at being a relatable protagonist despite barely having any lines. The naivety of Eustace and Muriel to all the things happening to them, combined with Courage's incessant and desperate yapping, makes the scenarios uniquely frustrating for Courage, and that extends to us as the viewer. Like, sometimes you just want to reach through the screen and slap some sense into them. You want Eustace and Muriel to listen to Courage, but despite his best efforts, they never understand him or take him seriously. We've all been in that situation where we are stuck at the mercy of someone clueless, and it's especially frustrating when it's someone we love, like Muriel, who just can't listen to us despite our best efforts. Courage trying to convey warnings to Muriel and Eustace became one of the show's recurring bits, with Courage morphing into whatever it is he thinks he's seen, as a way to charade them into what's happening. It's pretty funny stuff, and yet this never works. It's all very, I have no mouth and I must scream. It makes you feel sorry for Courage in this way, as it seems he's the only sensible one in the family. I think the first season in particular did a way better job of making you empathize with Courage, where he talked way more, but the big CN themselves had to slap down the studio with, "Oh, the dog talks too much." And from then on, Courage never really spoke to the camera. A shame, really, as I always thought the
Well, my name is Ivana, and it's not.
bit was really charming. I understand why they changed it though. The first season of Courage was really wordy, and with only a 10-minute runtime per episode, having Courage convey how he's feeling more efficiently, i.e. without dialogue, helped keep the pacing strong. Fortunately, Courage still managed to keep an endearing role for the most part in season 2 and onwards. You can still tell through his body language and his moments with Muriel that he really cares about protecting his home. You like to see Courage happy. It's really charming. Even when he's just sitting there on Muriel's lap or, well, that's all he really does. Wait, what is there to do in this place? Look at this place. I know it's literally meant to be in the middle of nowhere, but how do the Bag family live like this? Endless dry wastelands that span out to the horizon? Ugly skies? A derelict shack with muddy textures? The only other structure of note is the eerily slow windmill, looming over the house with a constant creaking sound. Always omnipresent at the start of each episode, but never does anything. I mean, it's not like anything is growing here. The whole setting reminds me a lot of Salad Fingers, if anything. Everything is open, yet empty. It feels vulnerable, but also lonely at the same time. The design of the Bag household is really great at presenting an eerie atmosphere, no matter which room of the house or even outside the house. The phrase liminal space gets chucked around a bunch nowadays, but like, look at these rooms. The tacky wallpaper, the orange glow. Hell, there's a room which is just a corridor with a computer at the end of it. This feels like a house we've all stayed in at some point, like an older relative outside of the country that you spend a week of your summer holidays visiting. The design of the Bag household is so effective, and it makes episodes where they do go out into more populated areas seem rather drab by comparison. I want that constant creaking of the windmill, that feeling of unease with every second that goes by. The team behind Courage did an excellent job with the design of this place, a house that lends itself to pretty much any episode concept. The show's score and sound effects also match the visuals perfectly. I love the rustic charm that was present, especially in the older episodes, heard in the score, but also just the characters' general uncanny mannerisms and appearances. The theme for the snowman is one of my favorites here, take a listen. I think it was a brave choice to have a Monster of the Week style show that, outside of Courage, had characters that were so unmarketable. Like, come on, no one's buying toys of these two. But that's what I love about the show. It wasn't afraid to step away from conventional tropes of character designs or plot points. The dullness of Eustace and Muriel as characters I feel makes their significance in the show stand out more than characters who are just vessels to carry a monster plot forward. There's history to these characters, unique quirks that appear from below their surfaces. They're so different, yet you can believe them to be an old married couple. I think this makes them perfect for the roles they fill, as like the house itself, Muriel and Eustace seem flat and old-fashioned. It really does seem like they would live in this house. The pair are frail, they're old and often unassuming, even when danger is staring them right in the eyes. The homeliness they bring to the house is quite endearing, and can often make me feel empathetic to the scenarios they find themselves in. In Courage the Cowardly Dog, we aren't the every person in the show that's in danger of the monster. Instead, we all know someone like Eustace or Muriel who is in danger. It's an interesting path to take that strikes up a bit of empathy from the viewer. Since Courage's connection with Muriel is so strong, you don't think, oh, I would hate to be in this situation. It's, oh, I would hate for the naive person I have a strong connection with to be in this situation. And that makes the show uniquely interesting. In fact, I want to take a bit of a deeper look at the three main characters to see what makes each of them work so well for the premise of the show. Muriel Bag is a caring, naive old wife with roots in Scotland, but her physical attributes give her a tinge of mystery. She's more capable than first meets the eye, showing multiple times her ability to juggle and play the sitar. The eerie twangs of the strings perfectly fit the theme of the show. Muriel's consistent positive energy gives her sufficient stakes in the episodes where she's kidnapped, possessed, or forced into marriage on some occasions. Her importance to Courage is abundant, especially with the soft piano melody that plays during more cheery moments where she and Courage bond, usually at the start or end of an episode. Although her positive attitude, combined with her naivety and age, means she often falls for the tricks of others while seeming incapable of standing up for herself. Ironically, the person she's most hard on is Eustace, where she doesn't seem to have much trouble telling him off. Losing Muriel is usually the driving force of most episodes of the show, which can lead her being shoehorned into episodes where she really doesn't belong. I get Courage himself not being enough to justify tension in an episode, but using Muriel as a damsel in distress to me only works if Eustace is also there, since they work so much better as a family unit. I shouldn't complain since there aren't actually very many episodes like this. However, the ones that fuzz up the characters the most I think are the holiday episodes. Every show eventually has these episodes just so they can say, what if our main characters were in this place? And usually, Courage as a show uses these changes of scene to do location-specific episodes that have some underwater tribe or Viking women. I wouldn't mind this since some of them are actually kind of good, like the Snowman episode I mentioned earlier. However, their abundance, especially in the later seasons, showed a lack of unique ideas for the tail end of the show, and having to rely on preconceived mythology. I think Muriel gets it the worst in these scenarios simply because she's so out of her element, either adjusting to the new environment unrealistically quickly, or just being a plot vessel to help stir tension. I hate the word flanderized, but it does really apply here. These episodes more often than not have a habit of shrinking Muriel to just being along for the ride, with the bare minimum of her attributes. What makes Muriel more than a damsel in distress is her consistently positive attitude with people, and her connection to both Courage and Eustace. She's the middle ground between the two opposing characters, and it's interesting to learn that she sees both of them equally, taking Courage into her life and showing him the same respect and affection as Eustace. She's a family woman who is happy to put the needs of others above her own, even though she show up to her door out of nowhere. With Muriel, I wish they dived into her insecurities a little more. That may seem harsh to say, but in the few episodes where she does lose her head a little, it can make the resolution to the plot more character-focused, which is often welcome when a lot of the plots are defeat the bad guy. Sure, a lot of Courage episodes end in subversive ways that appeal to the monster's inner wants, but to have that effect with a stable main character of the show would make the ending more satisfying in my opinion. The show actually sort of does this already with its Muriel-possessed episodes, like The Demon in the Mattress for example, where they realize using Muriel herself as the villain lends itself to some tense scenes. It almost ropes in the more mysterious aspects of her character, showing how she's more than capable than what she lets on. Eustace Bagg is the complete opposite of Muriel. He's a self-centered, greedy old farmer who is extremely jealous of Muriel's relationship with Courage, taking out his anger on the dog. Eustace's overconfidence in himself contrasts greatly with the fact that apparently this is meant to be a farm, yet Eustace can't grow a single thing, not even on his own head, something which he's shown to have great insecurity about.
But he called me bald.
Eustace, you are bald.
Well,
The few and fleeting moments of Eustace having a change of heart often sprout from his insecurities, such as him giving up his hat to a younger version of himself in The Curse of Shirley, and this is a trait that seemed to have carried over from his mother, who was also bald and insecure about it. Quick side note, not a fan of Eustace's mother as a character. Sometimes she'll just show up in random episodes that don't have a villain just to play the antagonist. I get her apprehensiveness towards Eustace is crucial to showing how he became so stubborn, but she really should have just been a one-off character and stayed in Mother's Day. Eustace has a surprising amount of hidden trauma relating to his family. On various occasions we're shown his famous explorer brother Horace, and how Eustace always wanted to upstage him. This manifests itself in the episode Farmer Hunter, Farmer Hunted, where Eustace's trauma about being the most hated child caused him to lose his mind. This can make Eustace quite the tragic character in episodes that shine a spotlight on him. However, his unwillingness to change and ignorance towards Muriel makes him more suited to the annoying anti-hero role, and his comeuppance at the end of episodes is pretty much always deserved. Any emotional childhood trauma inducing a change of heart in Eustace is only ever a little bonus on top. As the show went on into its final 2 seasons, I think Eustace got hit the hardest in terms of characters getting stale. He became solely the antagonist of Courage, as seen in Ball of Revenge, where he's just the evil mastermind hiring old villains to destroy Courage. He didn't feel like he fit into the family anymore. In the first 2 seasons, Muriel's relationship with Courage was parallel with Eustace, but the longer the show went on, the more they stretched that boundary and secluded Eustace from the family dynamic to the point where he had no real connection to Muriel at all, when, as the audience, we're supposed to believe they're married. Eustace was never evil, the guy just had some anger issues, and showed affection towards Muriel in his own way. I associate this pretty directly with his change of voice actor in season 3. although it's hard to say for certain if these events were directly correlated. Eustace's first voice actor, Lionel Wilson, brought a very crotchety and snappy voice to the character, delivering some of Eustace's most iconic lines that would frequently get brought back as sound bites.
Blah, blah, blah. I'm not getting out of this chair. Not getting out of this chair. No, sir. Not getting out of this chair.
Wilson, however, retired due to illness in 2001, where he was replaced with Arthur Anderson, and the difference was immediately obvious. Anderson's voice for Eustace brought a more nasally tone to the character, one that felt less aggressive and more care home-esque. It was a big hit to the show in my opinion, and drastically decreased my enjoyment of Eustace, as silly as that may sound. What was really odd is that they still used the sound bites of Eustace's iconic lines mixed in with the new voice Anderson brought to the character, making for very uncannily stitched up dialogue at parts.
Big deal.
Hey, I got a trick for your dog. Make yourself disappear.
It's a real shame because the show's reuse of sound bites and music give it so much personality. From Courage's iconic laugh to his incessant babbling, and even his little
Oh, Courage.
Wilson's
What's... Huh?
and
What did I do?
was so iconic that I understand why they wanted to keep them around for his character, but they really just didn't work with a new voice actor. Alright, let's finally get to the main man himself. Courage oozes charm with his dinky little legs and poor oral hygiene. The way he walks is always really snappy and goofy, lending himself well to physical situations. His stupid giddy laugh that he does when hurting himself cracks me up every time. He's perfect for physical comedy. Courage just has a natural chemistry with any character he's in a scene with. He's never antagonistic towards anyone, not even the villains. He works well as a punching bag in physical altercations, the confidant to Muriel, and even works well off the snark of his computer. Like I said earlier, I really liked Season 1 Courage talking. I think it gave us more insight into his actions and showed a stronger bond between him, Muriel, and even Eustace on occasion. I could see the argument of Courage being too repetitive in the show, but I never minded the recurring bits the show would use, and I think the repetition helps give the show some of its unique charm. Like, they never went overboard with the catchphrases or have Courage do the same thing every time to progress the plot forward. Sure, you may try and warn Eustace and Muriel every time, but there was never anything to anticipate from the plot of episodes that made you think, oh, they're just gonna do that again. In Scooby-Doo, the formula is always the same. They set a trap for the monster and end up unmasking it. It's always familiar, it's always expected. But with Courage, he can take a story's conclusion in any number of ways, from finding what the creature really needs to having to overcome something himself. The only quirks of Courage that the team do bring back are gags, and really good ones at that. Something I can heavily praise about the later seasons is how they animate Courage's initial scared reaction in different ways. It allows the team to get really creative. This scene in particular gets me every time. Ironically, Courage isn't a cowardly dog. He gets scared when someone unexpected shows up. But I mean, wouldn't you get scared when this freak is standing outside your home? But he never runs from a situation, instead choosing to face it head on no matter the threat. Courage's first catchphrase,
The things I do for love.
just goes to show that his love for Muriel supersedes his fear. Hell, when he deserves it, Courage will protect Eustace with that same energy because he knows that Eustace is important to Muriel, despite constantly abusing Courage. The concept of love coming first is integral to one of the legacies the show left us with, in my opinion, but we'll come on to that later. For now, I'd say the name Courage isn't ironic at all, as Courage does indeed show tremendous courage throughout the show. It's hard to believe I've had this much to say about the show, and I haven't even gotten to any of the episodes themselves. Season 1 and 2 of the show had some really strong episodes. Freaky Fred, King Ramsay's Curse, Queen of the Black Puddle, Car Broke Phone Yes, The Tower of Doctors is a Lost, just to name a few. It's like nothing was off limits in terms of what could happen. Some episodes you did have to kind of squint at and suspend your disbelief, like, bro, what is this? But the range of different ideas they had, supernatural, magic, sci-fi, thriller, and the fact that they all worked speaks volumes. However, Season 1 of Courage especially had some crazy pacing issues on occasion. Sometimes it was blatantly obvious that the idea they had just couldn't carry a whole episode, and you can tell because there will just be randomly extended sequences of Courage talking or something. The worst offender of this is in the episode Night of the Weremole, where this scene of Courage getting flung about by the weremole and Eustace trying to whack Muriel goes on for over a full minute. Which may not seem like a lot, but in a 10-minute segment, that's basically over 10% of the time spent on this one tiny scene. Like, seriously, go watch it. It's almost funny how long it goes on for. Thankfully, it seemed like the show grew out of its pacing issues fairly quickly, as most episodes had a strong enough villain or plot to fill the runtime. I share the sentiment that the iconic scary episodes are my favourites, like King Ramsay's or The House of Discontent. but they're iconic for a good reason. The show didn't waste a spooky design on a bad plot. Everyone and their grandma remembers the rasping pharaoh uncannily swaying in the fog, and the fact the family keeps pursuing through all the curses brought by the slab keeps the tension strong throughout the whole episode. It's also tied directly to Eustace's characterization of wanting to sell the slab for money, which is just, beautiful episode. Everyone plays their part perfectly. For me personally, however, the House of Discontent just edges out King Ramses. The spirit of the Harvest Moon is such an intimidating and overbearing figure. The choice to use live action for him just hits home his otherworldliness. He really feels omnipotent, and Eustace's stubbornness towards the spirit is really tense. This episode in general just gives so much more context to the farm. What does Eustace even do? He's a farmer, but there isn't a crop in sight, and anything planted instantly dies. So to see this be addressed as the house literally being cursed for the last 50 years recontextualizes how I looked at the house from then on. Eustace and Muriel's ignorance of the matter makes them so much more frustrating as characters, but in a good way that amplifies the scare factor. As the series went on, episode formulas started to repeat a little, and we began seeing the same kind of plot start to pop up. Take these season 2 and 3 episodes, Tower of Doctors Are Lost and Curtain of Cruelty, as examples. The general synopsis for both is just make all the townsfolk unhappy or evil, with a misunderstood scientist controlling it all. Tower definitely does the concept better in my opinion. Even though I'm not the biggest fan of the plot itself, the giant 3D walking castle looks so eerily unnatural as a set piece. I love it. Meanwhile, the Curtain of Cruelty tries to do the same concept, but doesn't have the staying power to stand on its own paranormal feet. Instead, realizing a pink wave isn't enough to carry an episode, and they need to tie a face to it with a motive behind it. A reason which, ironically, makes it feel like more of a copy of Tower in my opinion. The series is always good at characterizing their villains, but this dude isn't even that interesting compared to Doctors Are Lost, and I'm pretty sure he's just a reused design from one of the townsfolk. Muriel takes care of blank plots also began to appear quite frequently, like a scapegoat if the writer couldn't think of a better use for their monster. These were almost always naive Muriel plots, with Courage having to convince her of the creature's evilness. Think like the duckling, the scarecrow, the frogs, or the mask lady. I'll shout out the mask episode by the way. It's a weirdly down-to-earth story about what seems to be the abuse of women of all things, and a bunny girl and a cat girl who are best friends. Yeah, sure, friends. Very brave to slide that one under the bigwigs. Shout out to all my lesbian animals out there. I think they could have done more with the mask itself, i.e. give more reason for it to be that way, or add a sense of supernaturality to it, because it's a great design. The mask had the luxury of being only one of 2 22-minute episodes in the show's run, but I think the plot felt a bit too stretched out because of that. However, regarding the more concise 10-minute segments where Muriel takes in a stranger, they kinda just step on the same plot beats, only with a different face. It's Courage's equivalent of, this character stays at the Simpsons house. What I can say about these episodes is that at least they get strong visuals and characterizations, which I can't really say for the holiday episodes. I mentioned how these holiday episodes kind of dampen Muriel's character to just a damsel in distress, but I feel like there's a lot more to explain about why these episodes just didn't click with me. While the settings of the holiday episodes could on occasion be interesting and help make the placement of the monster make more sense, these sacrificed a lot of the homeliness that episodes set in nowhere had. When the family is shipped off to somewhere else in the world, it sacrifices that eerie familiarity for lame fish out of water stuff and low-hanging jokes about the culture of wherever they are. We just get the bare minimum from all the characters, until someone or something just kind of shepherds them into whatever the plot demands. I think The Snowman Cometh is a good example of this concept done right, since it reinforces the typical traits of the main 3 characters before diving into the plot. They're still living the same way they would at home, the only difference being the environment suiting the arrival of the snowman and his lair better. It's pretty much the same setting as the house back in nowhere, but on a snowy day. I think the series' quality took a bit of a plummet around the end of the 3rd season, where I just found myself zoning out on a lot of episodes. We were getting a lot of these fish out of water episodes by this point, simply because the team had run out of unique concepts. There were a couple of diamonds in the rough, however, like the Windmill Vandals in Season 4. Probably my favourite of the season, Windmill Vandals focuses on the purpose of the windmill, and how when it's moving, it stops the approach of the Harbingers. What are Harbingers? Did I write that correctly? Harbingers? Who have really good designs, might I add. It's a really strong concept that absolutely carries the episode. This also has incredible red lighting throughout that looks so good, easily one of the best looking episodes of the show. The standard of the average Courage episode was simply so high that mediocre ones just sort of felt dry. The absolute tell that the series was struggling for plots came through strongly in Season 4, with probably my least favourite genre of episode, the parodies. We had the Nutcracker, Rumpelstiltskin, Cowboy Courage. It was just lame. They took pre-existing stories and injected the humor of Courage into it, which just felt quite lazy to me. The difference between these and the episodes based on mythology is how they adapt the story of the source material. With the Rumpelstiltskin episode, we know the story already, and Courage just retreads it for us. Mythology-inspired episodes take the idea of the creature itself and write a new story around it. We see this even as early as the Bigfoot episode in season 1. Or hell, even a more direct movie character parody like Freaky Fred, who's based off of Sweeney Todd, manages to present a unique story using the idea of a demon barber, instead of shoehorning in the Courage characters into a story not written for them. The parody episodes were a sure sign of ideas dwindling. To use another Simpsons comparison, it's like how the Treehouse of Horror specials have evolved into lame parodies of stories that sometimes aren't even scary. It's just this popular story, but if it had these characters. Thankfully, I would say the series entered at a perfect time where these episodes didn't become the show's legacy. I can only imagine after another 4 more seasons of the show where they do a shitty Courage and the Beanstalk parody. Something I can pretty objectively praise about the show compared to its contemporaries is that the direction was consistently really strong. Even with some of the dud episodes, I think the fact John Dilworth himself directed every single episode of the show is what kept it so consistent. It felt like one vision from start to end, and the passion he had with his own work really shone through. Dilworth's influence on the show is everywhere. This is him in this picture on the wall, on the milk, on the poster here. It's a show that clearly had a lot of passionate people working behind it. The legacy Courage the Cowardly Dog left is one of personality and creative passion, and nothing exemplifies this more than the final episode of the whole series, Perfect. Now, this is the Courage episode everyone remembers, and it's for a damn good reason.
What? It's just an ordinary crabby. Oh my goodness!
Bro, what the hell is this thing? It comes out of nowhere with a really unnatural musical sting and serves literally no relevance to the plot. It's solely a visual stinger to convey Courage's nightmares of not being perfect, which is the theme of the episode. This fetus-looking thing and King Ramses were hands down the most iconic moments of the show. And this thing barely has any screen time. It shows up for about 6 seconds to say one line and one line only. Yet it's remembered as one of the scariest moments of the show, traumatizing kids nationwide. I remember watching this clip on YouTube as a kid and having to remove it from my search and watch history because I didn't want to have to see this face in the thumbnail anymore. There's a video by Chazington covering this creature in a lot greater detail that I'll link down below. Also, quick side note, I genuinely wrote all of this before watching Chazington's video, and it's amazing seeing how we agree on which aspects made the show so good.
These might be the first lesbians on children's television if you don't count those other characters that were in that Scooby-Doo crossover. Shaggy and Fred Joe.
But that's not the end of Courage's nightmares. There's 4 more sequences, each animated in a different style. One that I find seriously strange is this 3D sky texture with these flying cars that have indecipherable ancient looking runes and symbols on them. Like, was the team okay when making this episode? Like I said, this was the show's finale, so it made sense to splurge what budget they had left on something that would leave an impact. And it isn't just the visuals that hit hard this episode, it's also the writing too. I found it really odd that the episode prior to this, Remembrance of Courage Past, sets itself up as the perfect finale to the series. The episode shows through flashbacks the story of Courage meeting Muriel for the first time, how he earned his name, what happened to his parents, and ties the whole series in a really neat little bow connecting it back to the very start of the show's intro. The flashbacks reminds me of how Futurama handled its Fry in the Past episodes. 2 concurrent stories would play out in different time periods, and we see the protagonist use the lessons they learned in the past to come to a happy ending in the present. It's a really great episode, so to follow it up with Perfect, which tonally and conceptually feels like some off-the-wall creep factor they would shove in the middle of season 2, seems absolutely crazy. But I've sort of realized over time how Perfect being imperfect as a finale is kind of an allegory for the show itself. Yeah, wow, I know that sounds cheesy, but hear me out, okay? You've made it this far through the video. Perfect is often seen as depicting the main message of the show to be that it's okay for Courage to not be perfect, and that he will still be loved regardless. Muriel's cooking and Eustace's bugle not being perfect but still loved are very obvious metaphors for this. And this isn't an interpretation I disagree with. You've heard me harp on about Courage succeeding in being a character-driven show, so to end on this character-centric message which captures the flaws and morals of all 3 main characters throughout the series is a really strong ending to the series. However, I came away with another interpretation from this episode. Despite the show ending due to financial reasons, as well as being deemed too scary, I think Perfect is a metaphor for the show itself not being perfect. It's rough around the edges, not marketable, and clashed with the new programming that Cartoon Network were beginning to put out. With that in mind, the main villain isn't some supernatural force. Aside from the fact only Courage can see her, it's simply a strict lady in black and white, someone Courage fears and respects. To me, Courage represents the show itself, wanting to do his best to please a dictator that others can't see. A dictator dressed in black and white. If that wasn't enough to convince you, Courage eventually defeats the perfectionist with his creativity, proving how because he is not abiding by her expectations of being perfect, doesn't mean he can't be happy and live in his own way. I wouldn't be surprised if there was a little more behind the scenes to do with Courage's cancellation. A show renowned for scaring kids wouldn't be a good patch to have on a kids channel sleeve, regardless of if it could be considered creative expression. I do think Courage had run its course by this point, and the team may have already anticipated this to be their final season. Hell, it's like they knew the show was probably going to get cancelled regardless, so, along with a spiritual finale, decided to get one last jab at Cartoon Network with Perfect, by poking fun at them for shelving their imperfect show that decided to take risks, but also putting in the most batshit, insane, nightmare-inducing sequence in any of the episodes. It's like they'd written the message they wanted the show to go out on, and were like, yeah, let's go out with a bang and give some kids nightmares. What are they going to do, cancel us again? And my god, it worked. Courage the Cowardly Dog kept its values, creativity, and original vision all the way to the very end, and sacrificed none of it, even when they wanted to tell a more down-to-earth allegory. Courage the Cowardly Dog is many people's favourite Cartoon Network show. Even some praise it as their favourite cartoon, and it's not hard to see why. The show wasn't afraid to take risks, to treat the viewer with respect and not talk down to them, to have fun, to not abide by the standards of what came before. It redefined how you could tell monster stories by making them more character-focused, more funny, more creepy. The legacy of Courage lives on until this day, as it's no doubt paved the way for grittier and creepier media, as well as more mature and eccentric animation. Courage has helped inspire those like Wendigoon to pursue true crime and horror games, analytical reviews of the finale like from Chasington and Made to Express, and me to make this video. Over time, we can appreciate Courage more and more for being so indicative of cartoons of the late 90s and early 2000s, especially compared to some of the stale shows that are released nowadays. A show like Courage simply wouldn't work in today's landscape. A CGI revival pilot of the show was made in 2014, but one look at it and yeah, I'd rather remember the show for its original airing. The story of this pilot is one for another day, and thankfully hasn't touched the Courage legacy whatsoever. Long live Courage. You weren't perfect, but we still loved you regardless. Hey, thanks for watching until the very end. This has been a really big project for me, but I figured the best videos to make are videos you'd want to watch yourself. So if you enjoyed this kind of video and don't want to see this kind of content on YouTube die, let me know in the comments or come yell at me in my streams. Oh god, my throat hurts. I've been talking for like 2 hours straight. Alright, see ya.